Three things vanished that morning: a boat, a flag, and the last thread holding a war hero's silence. But no one in Driftmore Harbor had any idea what that silence had been keeping out. And by the time they realized, the sea wasn't the only thing hungry. Victor Harlan, 74, had carved out a life of solitude in Driftmore, a misty harbor town where the fog never quite lifted, and neither did people's gazes. Each morning before sunrise, Victor would slip quietly into the bay, his thick-scarred hands guiding the wheel of a vessel he had built with near-religious devotion after coming back from decades-old battles that most now chose to forget. In a coastal village slowly being swallowed by real estate agents and cocktail bars, Victor remained a barnacled fragment of the past, ignored by many, respected by few. His boat, Ghost Mare, was no beauty queen. Layers of salt had eaten through the once deep green paint, and the hull creaked like old bones when it rocked, but she was solid, built by someone who knew that strength hides beneath weathered skins. Victor had hammered every nail, sanded every curve of her after returning from years in naval black ops missions he never spoke of, memories he never escaped. The men at the docks knew little about what he'd done, only that he wore an old medallion around his neck, and sometimes, just after midnight, you could hear a cry echo across the marina like someone had seen death again in their dreams. Victor slept on that boat more often than in his house. That Wednesday morning started like so many others. At 5:00 a.m., he was out, setting crab traps and angling for the best view of the sun clawing its way through the fog near Widow's Point. He had just tied off his lines when he heard it, a low, throaty purr that grew into a roar. Around the bend, like a monstrous white whale born of steel and privilege, came Eclipse 1, 700 tons of custom European opulence that gleamed like a palace at sea. At the helm stood Sebastian Locke, 39, a smug crypto-billionaire who'd recently bought up 3 of Driftmore's historic buildings to turn them into NFT lounges. Victor recognized him from the local rags, articles that praised Locke's visionary investments, and called him a boon to the economy. As Eclipse 1 tore through the water like it owned it, Victor raised his arms in warning. The yacht showed no hesitation, plowing forward as if daring him to test fate. "Hey, hull in the water!" Victor shouted, but the yacht's throaty engine drowned him out. Up on the sun-bleached deck, Locke and his entourage clinked glasses filled with something bubbly and expensive, laughing at a joke Victor didn't hear, didn't care to. Whether they didn't see him or didn't care wasn't clear. The harbor patrol boat bobbed like a paper cup nearby, its single officer watching with a growing frown but making no move. The impact was immediate. With a sickening, splintering sound, Ghost Mare's stern gave out under the crushing force of the yacht's bow. The old wood didn't stand a chance. Victor dove at the last moment, hitting the dock with a grunt as his sanctuary crumbled beneath the billionaire's leisure vessel. The flag he had flown for 45 years, a battered emblem of service and solitude, ripped from its mount and slipped beneath the wave. The red dye spiraled like blood in the surf. The yacht's engines finally wound down. Silence followed, momentarily, before Locke's voice rose, bored and dismissive. "It's just driftwood with a motor. Move on, old man." Victor pulled himself up slowly, wincing, his knees crackling. Around him, the morning crowd had begun to gather. Joggers with earbuds, dockhands with coffee, influencers already filming. None reached out. A security officer finally approached, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Harlan, we'll need to fill out an incident report." But Victor wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on the water, where his soaked flag floated, limp and torn. He staggered along the dock, pain threading through every joint until he could crouch, barely, and scoop it out, pressing the dripping cloth to his chest with the tenderness of a man mourning an old friend. When he finally turned to face the gawking crowd, his gaze held no fury, no plea, only a cold steadiness that made a few look away in sudden shame. From the upper deck, Locke sneered, "You know, maybe it's time to buy something made this century. Everything rusts eventually." Victor didn't answer. He simply turned, flag in hand, walking slowly away, with the spine still straight and footsteps still firm, though his hands trembled from more than the cold. Behind him, a snort of laughter broke the hush, followed by the chime of a notification. The first video was up. Caption: Washed-up war vet loses wooden dinghy. Lol. By noon, the wreckage had been cleared. The ghost mare was gone, the harbor sparkled clean, sterilized of inconvenience. The video kept gaining traction, most viewers typing laughing emojis before scrolling to food pics and conspiracy shorts. Not a word about the grief that shimmered in an old man's eyes. Victor's home sat on a wind-beaten bluff just above the marina, a humble place he'd bought with a military pension, back before coastal land turned into gold. From his front window, he'd watched Driftmore morph from fishing town to influencer playground, the change as silent and inevitable as a rising tide. That evening, he sat alone at a time-worn table, a wooden chest open before him. Inside were relics, faded photos of grim young men, medals dulled by years, a cracked compass, and at the bottom, a folded American flag, stiff and perfect, the one they gave him the day he left active duty. His grandson Ilias, home from college for spring break, stood in the doorway watching. "You're suing him, right, Grandpa? He destroyed your boat. That prick's gotta pay." Victor said nothing at first, just brushed his fingers over the fabric's embroidered stars. Then he murmured, "He didn't destroy me, just something no one ever saw the value in." Ilias clenched his fists, the injustice scraping raw in his chest. Ilias saw fire in this injustice, more fire than his grandfather's eyes had shown in years. "But you built that boat?" Ilias said, incredulous. "It meant something. It was yours." Victor nodded once. "Yes. To me?" Later, after Ilias had gone to bed, Victor opened the old weathered ledger he kept beneath the sink. For over 4 decades, he'd used it to log the tides, storms, and secrets of the sea. The page for this day read only, "First dawn without ghost mare. No apologies received." "But I still hear the ocean whispering my name." He closed the book and flicked on the tiny television perched on the counter. The local news was featuring Sebastian Locke's yacht, Eclipse 1, hailed as the largest luxury vessel to ever dock in Driftmore. No mention of the morning's collision. Online, the viral clip had taken a darkly comedic turn. Most comments praised the yacht and its owner. That wreck was a hazard anyway. Another relic refusing to retire. "Just get a real boat, Grandpa." That afternoon, the harbor master called. His voice was clipped and sterile, like someone delivering a rejection for a loan he didn't agree with, but couldn't override. "Your vessel lacked modern navigation standards, no radar reflectors, no certified running lights. I'm sorry, but insurance won't cover the damage." Victor listened without interrupting, then said thank you and hung up. He didn't bother explaining ghost mare had been grandfathered in under previous safety codes, that every annual inspection had passed with praise. What would be the point? The sea had claimed back what he had once borrowed from it. That was always the deal, wasn't it? But as he stood that night on his porch, overlooking the quiet harbor, the loss felt unnatural, not like a return to the elements, but a theft. The ache wasn't just for wood and canvas. It was for mornings wrapped in silence, for the dance of dolphins racing his wake, for the hush of nights where the lull of the sea drowned out the things he'd done in darker waters. It had been the only place the war hadn't followed him. Only out there did the stench of smoke and screams fade, replaced by salt and sky. Now, from his vantage point, Eclipse 1 loomed in the distance, all blinding lights and synthetic laughter, like a floating casino celebrating everything Victor had never wanted. The music carried. So did the careless joy of the rich. He didn't hate them for it. He'd seen what hate did. He just wished they understood what they'd erased. Something quieter, deeper. A rhythm you didn't control, only respected. In the silver wash of moonlight, Victor pulled out the other flag, the pristine one folded tight since his retirement. He draped it over the porch rail, letting the sea breeze brush its fabric like fingers across a scar. At dawn, instinct woke him. He reached for his boat keys out of reflex, then paused, hollow dread expanding like cold water in his chest. For the first time in 40 years, he had no place to go when the horizon bled light. No helm to grip, no harbor to haunt. He didn't want money, didn't demand justice, but he did want something. If you believe honor doesn't come with a price tag, type honor. That morning, the mist wrapped Driftmore in a veil. The harbor entrance faded behind a curtain of fog so thick it seemed the ocean had sealed itself off. Victor sat on the porch, coffee gone lukewarm in his hands, staring at the gray division between land and memory. Since losing Ghost Mare, he kept waking at sailor's hours, but now there was nowhere to go. He was an anchor with no chain, a captain on land. Then came the sound. 3 deep, resonant foghorn blasts rolled through the stillness. Victor straightened. Even after all these years, his body reacted. That signal, it was for large vessels entering tight channels. He stepped to the edge of the porch, squinting. The fog parted like curtains drawn for a stage. Emerging with cold precision were 6 Navy ships in formation, each cutting through the waves with grim authority. Their hulls gray, their decks tidy, they moved without fanfare. No public alerts, no town banners, no eager reporters. Just presence. Silent, deliberate, powerful. On each ship, the American flag flew at half-mast. As word rippled through town, Driftmore paused. Shopkeepers flipped signs from open to closed. Day camps ended early. Parents held their children closer, unsure why they suddenly felt the need to whisper. Onlookers gathered at the edge of the dock, a tide of curious humanity, converging without knowing why. Victor watched, puzzled. No fleet maneuvers had been announced, no dignitaries scheduled, no memorials planned. The destroyer leading the column, USS Brer, moved into the harbor with razor precision. And there, on the bow, stood Rear Admiral Jonathan R. Massey, dress whites gleaming like bleached bone under the morning sky. In his gloved hands was a perfectly folded American flag, its sharp triangle blue with stars. Victor felt a tightness coil in his chest. He recognized that fold, had done it himself more times than he could count, when brothers didn't return from sea, from gunfire, from silence. That fold wasn't for ceremony. It was for the dead. He rose slowly, legs stiff, breath shallow, and made his way down the hill. The crowd, sensing something wordless but important, parted as he passed. They didn't know who he was, but somehow they knew to move. At the end of the dock, Admiral Massey stepped forward. His salute snapped into place, a strike of respect. "Chief Boatswain Harlan," he said, voice cutting the hush like a blade, requesting permission to come ashore and render full honors. Victor's arm lifted before he thought. The salute answered itself, automatic and alive, buried in the marrow of who he still was. Even after decades out of uniform, the instinct was still there. "Permission granted, Admiral," Victor said, surprised by the strength in his voice. Admiral Massey descended the gangway with slow, deliberate steps, flanked by a crisp color guard. On every deck of the 6 naval vessels, sailors stood rigid, eyes forward, facing the shore like statues of solemn reverence. 43 years ago, Massey began, turning not to Victor but to the gathered townsfolk. This man averted a catastrophic failure aboard the USS Leviathan during a typhoon in the South China Sea. A coolant line ruptured near the munitions bay. The Admiral's voice carried across the harbor like a tide turning. He entered the compartment alone, no suit, no warning. He sealed it with his bare hands, sustaining burns to over 60% of his body. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. His actions prevented toxic gas from reaching the lower bunks. 156 sailors slept below that night, completely unaware how close they came to death. People turned, many for the first time noticing the faint scars trailing Victor's throat, vanishing beneath the collar of his shirt. Chief Harlan refused the Navy Cross, said only, "Take care of the ones who didn't make it." Since then, he's lived here, among you, silent, asking nothing. The admiral's gaze swept out across the water, pausing briefly on Eclipse 1, where Sebastian Locke and a few others stood quietly watching from the upper deck, their smiles absent now. Yesterday, his boat Ghost Mare was destroyed here. No assistance was offered, no respect given. The flag he served under allowed to sink. A young ensign stepped forward, solemn and steady, holding a plaque of polished wood. He bowed before handing it to Victor, etched into the brass plate. For the man who kept the sea safe, even after duty. The U.S. Navy remembers. Admiral Massey continued, "We are here today to render formal honors to Chief Boatswain Victor Harlan, to recognize that duty doesn't end when the uniform comes off." Across the harbor, sailors raised salutes, flags lifted. The ships stood not as machines of war, but monuments of memory. It was more than a tribute. It was tradition awakened, a forgotten echo roaring back. Someone in the crowd live-streamed the moment. Within minutes, the footage went viral. Yesterday's cruel #BoomerDown was swallowed by veteran salute. Comments shifted. The mockery vanished beneath waves of reverence. "I didn't know. I feel ashamed." True heroism doesn't advertise. This is what honor looks like. Locke, still aboard his gleaming yacht, finally looked uneasy. His guests no longer laughed. Their champagne sat untouched, as the scene below unfolded with gravity they couldn't drink away. After the presentation, Admiral Massey leaned closer to Victor. "Your grandson Elias contacted the Naval Alumni Foundation." "That's how we found out." Victor's lips twitched. "Didn't seem like your problem, sir. Just an old man's wreck." "No, Chief." The Admiral's gaze turned to the open sea. "It was never just a boat, and you were never just a sailor. Some debts run too deep for payment." As the ceremony closed and the ships prepared to depart, something unexpected began. The townspeople approached Victor, one by one, many for the first time. They offered handshakes, apologies, nods of respect. The harbor master stepped forward with a folder. "Fishing permits for life, Chief." The marina's owner added, "Slips yours, free for any vessel you decide on." Victor accepted it all with that same calm gravity. No gloating, just the quiet poise of a man used to enduring. But for those who looked close, really looked, there was a new glint in his eyes. Not pride, recognition. After all these years he had been seen. 1 week later, the town held a small dedication ceremony. At Victor's former mooring spot now stood a simple marker carved from dark stone. Ghost Mare, a vessel that carried more than one life. The town council passed it unanimously. Several members wept, confessing they had never known the truth of the quiet man who'd always been there, just part of the background, until he wasn't. Small changes spread like ripples in the harbor. Tourists no longer passed him by. They stopped at the memorial, read his story. Local fishermen, once pushed to the margins by party yachts, were suddenly met with nods and acknowledgement. But the most surprising shift came in the children. Where they'd once been told to steer clear of grumpy old sailors, now they gathered at the docks. They listened. They learned, not from apps, but from living memory. This afternoon, Victor sat on a brand new bench, hands steady despite the age. Before him sat a semicircle of wide-eyed kids. He demonstrated rope work, looping, knotting, securing, as though he were still at sea. "This here's a bowlin'," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Saves more lives than you'd believe. Been doing it since before Columbus thought the world was flat." A little girl named Lila, no more than 7, squinted in concentration as he guided her fingers through the twists. Then she asked, without warning, eyes clear, voice pure, "Are you mad at the man who broke your boat?" Victor paused, considering Lila's question with the same patience he'd given while teaching her the knot. "No," he said at last, voice calm but certain. "If it weren't for people like that, Maybe no one would have remembered the ghost mare ever existed. The children nodded, absorbing this the way only children can, deeply, without needing to speak. They understood in their bones what many adults missed. Later that day, Victor had an unexpected visitor. Sebastian Locke stood stiffly at the far edge of the dock, expensive sunglasses perched uselessly on his head, far removed from the gleaming confidence he normally carried. Without his entourage, he looked exposed. "Mr. Harlan," he began, awkward, uncertain, then paused, swallowed hard. "I came to say I was wrong, completely out of line." Victor said nothing, just waited, eyes steady. Locke pulled out a sealed envelope. "There's a blank check in here. Whatever you think your boat was worth, hell, whatever you think I owe you, name the number." Victor glanced at it but didn't move. "Money won't replace what was lost," he said. "Then tell me what will," Locke replied, desperation flickering in his voice. "I've been a grade A jerk, and now I'm viral for wrecking a vet's boat. Everyone hates me. I want to make it right." Victor studied him for a long time. "There's a spot on the East Pier," he said slowly. "Faces the sunrise. Put a bench there, a real one, solid wood, long landing. Carve it with 3 words. 3 words, Locke asked. "Sit. Remember. Thank." Locke blinked, clearly expecting something bigger. "That's it. A bench." "Sometimes," Victor murmured, gaze drifting to the sea. "What people need most is a place to stop and think about what matters." 2 days later, a master craftsman arrived from Seattle, commissioned to build a teak bench exactly to Victor's request. On its face, those 3 words were inlaid with bronze, meant to weather with the salt air but never fade. Locke helped install it, quietly. No assistance, no selfies. His hands, soft and manicured, blistered as he worked. But he didn't complain. Word spread fast. The local news picked it up, then the national outlets. "Veteran declines fortune, requests memorial instead." Some called Victor too forgiving. Others called him wise beyond measure. Veteran groups across the country pointed to his example when they talked about the real meaning of honor. Victor didn't care for the attention. He just kept doing what he'd always done. Quiet work, teaching kids. Without the ghost mare, he could no longer bring in fresh fish for the community kitchen like he used to. But now, he gave something else. His time. His steadiness. His lived knowledge of wind and tide and consequence. 1 month later, Admiral Massey returned, this time in a beat-up sedan. No fanfare, no dress whites, just jeans and a leather jacket. He found Victor in the usual place, seated on the dock, working a net with a boy from the neighborhood. "The Secretary of the Navy has a proposal," Massey said, easing into a seat beside him. "They're expanding a youth maritime initiative, teaching sailing, ocean stewardship, navigation. They need instructors, men who understand both the sea and what it takes to raise good sailors." Victor arched a brow. "I'm a creaky old man, Admiral. These days, I'm more salt than bone." Massey grinned. "Tell that to the kids who follow you around like ducklings. The job's yours, part-time, flexible hours, not bad pay." Before Victor could reply, noise from the harbor caught their ears. A newly built wooden boat was being towed in, sleek, classic, with curves straight out of another time. On the stern, fresh paint gleamed. Birdie's child. The entire town seemed to arrive at once, swarming the docks with breath held. Aaliyah stood proudly at the tiller, beaming. "Surprise, Grandpa," he shouted. "We used your old blueprints, found them rolled up in your shed." The Boat Builders Guild donated supplies. Vets from 4 different states helped build her. Victor's jaw worked, but no words came. The vessel glided closer. The design was familiar, achingly so. Aaliyah secured the lines. We added a few things, modern safety gear, a nav system, but she's got your soul, Grandpa. Your hands didn't build her, but your heart did. Victor stepped aboard, slowly. His legs remembered the motion. His balance returned like it had never left. He ran his palm along the railing, wood smooth under calloused skin. At the bow, a new American flag fluttered sharp and clean in the breeze. For a man, Elias said, who kept faith, even when no one was watching. That evening, with a horizon painted in crimson and fire, Victor sat alone on Locke's bench. He watched the boats return home, sails down, decks heavy with the day's work. Nearby, a young family paused. The father read the inscription aloud. Sit. Remember. Thank. Their little boy frowned. What does that mean? It means, the man said softly, we should pause sometimes and remember the people who made our lives possible. Victor didn't turn, but he smiled, just faintly, eyes fixed on the line where sea kissed sky. In a world sprinting toward tomorrow, he had become something rare. A stillness that asked us to glance back, not for nostalgia, but for respect. His new boat would sail the same tides, not just carrying gear and nets, but lessons. Legacy, the idea that real strength isn't loud, it's steady. He had never demanded justice, just bent down, picked up a fallen flag, and walked away. But the sea had remembered, and the next morning, it rose to meet him. Underscore 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 understand. There is a place to include the stories of others through telling your story. If others believe stories like this shouldn't be forgotten, it's just a fishing boat, Locke had once said, laughing. Then came the crash, the flag, the silence, and 6 Navy ships entering a harbor with their colors at half-mast. Who were they honoring, and why? Maybe the sea doesn't forget, even when we do. Tell us what you believe below.